The following program features archival footage from World War II. All of the images are real. Some are extremely graphic. Viewer discretion is advised.
Dresden, Hamburg, Berlin. These historic German cities are about to become the scenes of unimaginable levels of destruction. In this film, we look at the air war over Germany as the Allied forces unleash their fury on Germany's civilian population.
It's beyond my comprehension how anyone could have survived the inferno of burning.
When you blitz London, you must expect your enemies to come back at you with every bit of terror at their disposal.
From daring dam-buster missions to thousand-bomber raids, the battles in the skies over Germany take warfare to new, unimaginable levels. Featuring newsreels of the time, rare and enhanced archive footage, and the testimonies of those who were there. This is World War II, Witness to War. Great Britain, summer 1941. The Battle of Britain comes to an end after the Royal Air Force defeats Germany's Luftwaffe. As a result, Adolf Hitler calls off his invasion of Britain and instead turns his attention to the East and Russia. Now the British want revenge for the mass devastation suffered during the Blitz. Eager to take the war to Germany are the brave men of RAF Bomber Command. For some, it offers a chance to fulfill a childhood dream.
I would think it was the exploration. This was the time of the great exploratory flights. It was all adventure.
My interest in flying had been aroused when I was 12. I witnessed the Battle of Britain taking place over my head. We had a grandstand view of the titanic struggle going on day after day. Flying was what I wanted most.
Nazi Vice-Chancellor and veteran fighter pilot Hermann Goering swears that not a single bomb will drop on Germany. He promises that no enemy bomber will reach the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. But he's about to have a rude awakening. The Allies' World War II bombing campaign begins before 1941. On August the 25th, 1940, 70 RAF bomber planes head for key industrial targets in Berlin, aiming for the very heart of the German Reich. Adolf Hitler is furious and resolves to totally destroy British cities.
Hitler said, "This is a good moment. Now I'll order the bombing of London, and it will satisfy domestic opinion. At the same time, it will play an important part in our preparations for invasion."
London bears the brunt of Hitler's fury.
I bombed London because the English were already at work bombing Berlin, and very heavily. And we only did it by way of retaliation. We hit back. So God help me, I flew over London 23 times and dropped my bombs onto it. There was no precise targeting, no strategic purpose in what I did. I felt very bad about that.
To make matters worse, the British raid on Berlin is a failure. The bombers miss their targets, leading many to question whether Bomber Command will ever be an effective fighting force.
When I reached the squadron in 1940, Bomber Command had virtually nothing. It was a very weak, ill-equipped force without any sensible objectives for the equipment they had.
They had too few planes, they were too small, they were too slow. If they flew in daylight, they got shot down. If they flew at night, they couldn't find the target.
Flying at night against completely blacked out cities, it was very difficult for them to even find a whole town, let alone to find a particular target. From the German point of view, it was quite hard to work out what Bomber Command was trying to do, because the majority of the bombs, in fact, dropped on the countryside.
The British government launches a full inquiry into Bomber Command. On August the 18th, 1941, the results of what is known as the Butt Report are circulated, highlighting the failings of the bombing campaign.
We learnt that although Bomber Command believed they had found the target, 2/3 of the crews actually failed to strike within 5 miles of it. Churchill sent a minute to the chiefs of air staff and demanded that they gave urgent attention to this problem of getting the bombs in the right place.
New leadership is required to turn things around. And Winston Churchill has just the man for the job. February the 19th, 1942. Sir Arthur Butch Harris is appointed Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command.
He took over Bomber Command in 1942, and he transformed it from a fairly meagre force into the finest operational bomber force that has ever happened.
The biggest thing that ever happened for Bomber Command was when we got a real punchy leader. And everybody immediately said, well, at long last, we've got somebody here who's real gutsy.
In Arthur Harris, the RAF finally got somebody who really understood what bombing might be capable of achieving. Harris was single-minded, hated criticism. His crews were massively loyal to him, partly because they saw him as such a pugnacious individual, somebody who was determined to get at the Boche, as he called them.
The Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everybody else and nobody was going to bomb them. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind.
His words strike a powerful chord at a time when Allied victory seems impossible. Harris immediately addresses the issues raised in the Butt Report. He adopts a new tactic, area bombing. The German people are now in the firing line.
Bomber Harris's attitude, fully endorsed by Churchill, was to attack the city. That was much easier in terms of accuracy than bombing an oil refinery.
The tough tactic is driven by a new total war philosophy.
We weren't aiming particularly at the civilian population. We were aiming at the production of everything that made it possible for the German armies to continue the war. They're all active soldiers, to my mind. People who work in the production of munitions must expect to be treated as active soldiers. Otherwise, where do you draw the line?
He cared for his crews, but he was very happy to kill a lot of Germans. That's what he aimed to do. You could say, logically, in a total war, civilians are also part of the war effort.
The RAF convinced itself that by bombing population centers, which were big and easy to hit, that Britain would win the war by dehousing German workers and making them unable to do their jobs.
It's a philosophy that resonates with British airmen.
We didn't start the war. It was a war worth fighting. It was a war that had to be won. Thank God it had to be won. And there was only one way of doing it, to my mind, as an excellent bomber captain, was to hit the Germans where it hurt.
May 1942. Bomber Command launches Operation Millennium, the first ever 1,000-bomber raid. New Halifax and Lancaster bombers, with their longer range, increased speeds and larger bomb loads, set off for their target, the German city of Cologne.
The next target was Cologne, well known for its many searchlights. This particular night, the Pathfinder markers were about 8 minutes late, and we were hanging around, waiting for them to go down.
The RAF Pathfinders, the target marking squadrons, finally arrive and locate the targets with guiding flares.
I saw the brilliant colors of the target markers on the ground. The flag, the searchlights, the fires, the bombs bursting on the ground.
1,500 tons of bombs fall on Cologne. 2/3 of these are incendiary bombs, which start fires that soon rip through the city. 500 Germans are killed, 45,000 made homeless, and many more are forced to flee.
1,000 bomber attack on Cologne was not that big. I mean, it was, in terms of civilian casualties, not bigger than the German attack on Coventry. It was more the perception, oh, if the Bomber Command could send 1,000 bombers to Germany, what would be the future? So it was not the actual damage, but some thoughts and worries about the potential of a future offensive.
It was the point at which they began to crank up civil defence, the point at which they began to crank up the radar and anti-aircraft network in Germany, the point at which they suddenly realised that if Britain went on doing this, it was going to be a serious menace to the German war effort.
The Nazis are forced to commit more precious resources to air defence. But the world's largest superpower is about to arrive and add fuel to the fire. Washington, D.C., June 1942. After Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, the US is now at war with the Axis powers. The Battle of Midway against the Japanese is being fought in the Pacific, while in the Atlantic, the battle against German U-boats continues along the American East Coast. It's not long before the US Air Force heads to Britain to support its ally.
Britain had been kind of standing alone for many months and had endured the Battle of Britain and the Blitz. So when things began to change in 1941 with the Soviet Union and also America coming into the war, then I think the British people generally were heartened by that there was support for them.
The young men who arrive have an electric effect on the local population, especially the ladies.
When we first met them, we thought they were rather brash, cheeky, because they were entirely different from the English boys being rather quiet, American boys being rather outspoken. The majority of them were quite fun. I did get engaged to my husband, naturally, and married him. But when we first met, I really didn't like him.
I'm sure we made an impression. Being a flyer during World War II was a little bit different. We were the so-called glamour boys.
The American invasion of Great Britain, I think, was probably welcomed by many women. So these American servicemen embodied the glamour of the Hollywood star.
There are very mixed reactions, I think. Of course, there's relief that we have a powerful ally. There's a lot of curiosity about the Americans. There's excitement and, to some extent, jealousy about the fact they have money, they have chocolates, they have chewing gum, they have jazz, and so on. There's certainly jealousy.
Their uniforms were much smarter than ours. They had much more money. The girls were much more interested in the Americans than they were in us. And when the Americans had a dance, they'd send lorries in to take these women. And the town was virtually denuded. We hated that, because all these wretched women had gone off to join America.
The American uniform at its best is very smart. My brother and one or two of the other men felt a bit, their noses were pushed out of joint because of all the attention that these Americans were getting, you know.
But as charming as they are, the Americans have a darker side. And it's not welcomed by the locals.
Also seems to be dislike of the fact that the American army is racially segregated. It seems the British public didn't like that at all.
The authorities were very concerned about kind of racial segregation and whether they didn't want to offend the American authorities, and so were keen to treat black GIs very carefully. So there were concerns about white British women dancing with black GIs, for example, and that could lead to tension.
But the British people refuse to accept public segregation, and black soldiers are, on the whole, welcomed. This spark of light abroad helps inspire the black GIs to join the civil rights movement when they return home. While the American Air Force is greatly appreciated by the British, when it comes to planning a bombing strategy, they reject RAF tactics.
And the interesting thing with the Americans is a very different concept. The American conviction was more, we attack during daylight, we can do precision bombing, and we attack the key industry.
We had enormous respect for the American Air Force. We thought what they were doing was far more dangerous than what we were doing. Their attitude was to fly very close formations and operate in daylight. From their point of view, they were more accurate, they felt, because in daylight they could see the target and so forth. From our point of view, the casualty rate would be far greater than what we could have afforded.
But American commitment to precision bombing of specific targets doesn't last long.
The RAF had started the war thinking they could bomb precision targets and had found that they couldn't, and therefore they'd started bombing cities. Okay, later on the Americans start off with the same belief that they, the Americans, will hit precision targets, and then they find they can't. So in effect, they start area bombing in the same way that the RAF had.
With the Americans now pursuing area bombing, the Third Reich faces around-the-clock attacks on its cities.
This changed very much the air war over Germany because the British were attacking in the night and now the Americans came during daylight. So it's all around the whole day attacking, and the Germans have to build up not only a night air defense but also a day air defense against the Americans.
By 1943, an enormous 40% of German war spending has to be committed solely to air raid defense. Valuable resources are taken away from the Eastern Front. With the Germans on their heels, RAF Bomber Command prepares for a famous attack with an ingenious new weapon. Lincolnshire, England, May 1943. RAF 617 Squadron embarks on a top-secret mission. Codenamed Operation Chastise, its targets are the huge dams along the Ruhr and Eder valleys in western Germany.
The RAF realizes we can blow up the dam upriver of the Ruhr Valley. All that's necessary is getting one very big bomb onto one very big dam. We can let the River Ruhr roar down the valley and destroy all of Germany's industrial capability at once.
Each of the 19 Lancasters in 617 Squadron carries a special weapon developed by the brilliant scientist Barnes Wallis. He's invented a bomb that bounces across the surface of water.
He then did proceed to have this wonderful test in the garden at our family home, where he set up the zinc wash tub and he got a catapult made. He altered the angle of the slant that the ball was going to be delivered at and the distance from the water, and then he bounced my sister's marbles.
Barnes Wallis is able to develop a munition capable of immense precision that can bounce on the water above a dam and blow it up.
The specially trained 617 Squadron is led by 24-year-old Wing Commander Guy Gibson, a man who divides opinion.
My appreciation at that stage was that he was arrogant, he was bombastic, but one had to accept that at that time he was one of, if not the most experienced bomber pilot in Bomber Command. So he had something to be arrogant about.
The Dam Buster mission requires dangerously low-level flying.
The original dropping and the height was 150 feet, but during the development of the bomb itself, it was obvious that was going to be much too high. Barnes Wallis asked Gibson, do you think you could drop it from 60 feet? Gibson said, well, that's a hell of a thing to ask, but we'll try it and see.
If you can equip one squadron with technology capable of achieving immense precision, and if you can turn that one squadron against one target, perhaps you can win the war regardless of its industrial nature.
Under the cover of darkness, squadron pilots close in on their targets.
We lined up with the dam, and I set my gyro so that I would know exactly in which direction to attack. By this time, if the bomb was spinning and the whole aircraft was shaking.
7 bouncing bombs are dropped. The spectacular low-level attack destroys the Myrna and the Ada dams, unleashing vast floods that sweep through the valleys below.
The sky was getting light. It was getting towards daylight. We had to come back over the Myrna Dam, and it was at that stage that we saw that it was really a deluge, that the thing had been breached.
The crews, deep in enemy territory, now face a perilous journey home.
Our job was now to get back to England, and of course, being daylight, there was the added hazard of fighters.
Two Lancasters are shot down trying to reach England. 56 out of 133 airmen do not return. In the context of World War, the mission's military value is relatively small, but it plays a huge role in the propaganda war.
In a total war of big industrial countries, it is not important. But that everyone knows about the Dam Busters demonstrates that the British narrative on the war is very much about this James Bond heroic stories of the few and the many. That Guy Gibson, with his bombers, in this heroic task operation, achieved something.
The raid wins a special place in the pages of military history, and Guy Gibson becomes an international hero.
I think his true leadership qualities were shown on the actual raid itself, where he made the first attack on the Myrna Dam. Apart from dropping his bomb, he assessed the defence at the same time. And then, as he called each aircraft in turn, he flew alongside them to detract some of that defence, which to me says, you're doing this, I'm doing this, we're doing this together. And that to me is the essence of good leadership, leading from the front. He was a great leader.
617 Squadron becomes famous as the Dam Busters.
617 Squadron is not able to destroy German industry in the Ruhr Valley. However, what 617 Squadron demonstrates is that the right piece of technology against the right target can have overwhelming effect on the course of the war.
And the Allies are about to unleash yet more of their newest technology on the German people.
Here's one type of British incendiary. Fire watchers in Germany get quite a kick out of those, I dare say, when they come raining down. The Germans have tried some pretty conic firebombs on us, but it's nice to see the sort of thing we're sending to Germany, especially when we remember Goering's promise, no bombs on the Reich.
Hamburg, Germany, July 1943. In an operation codenamed Gomorrah, wave after wave of Allied Halifax and Lancaster bombers launch a massive assault on the city centre. As pilots approach, the city is already engulfed in flames, but the night skies are filled with terror.
It did look awfully dangerous. It looked terribly dangerous, that target lit up with fires on the ground and searchlights and aeroplanes going down in flames.
For 8 days and 7 nights, bombers continue to release their huge payloads.
Enormous fires were started, and the American Air Force bombers bombed during the day as well, so that Hamburg was virtually completely obliterated. That I can still see the huge red glow of the fires.
For the citizens of Hamburg, it's a horror they'll never forget.
As long as I live, I shall never forget it. It's beyond my comprehension how anyone could have survived the inferno of burning, crumbling houses and come out alive. I was among the very fortunate ones who escaped, without even one singed hair. It made me feel quite guilty at times that I should be so lucky, while others suffered so much.
I mean, Bomber Command had the conviction that by burning down German city centers of dozens of German cities, they can crack the German morale. So if they kill the workers can't work for the German industry. And if they cause chaos, and if they destroy the big German cities, no developed country could wage a total war.
Yes, well, Hamburg was the major German naval port from which they conducted their Battle of the Atlantic, and the major building site for their submarines. The effect of the bombing of Hamburg, amongst many other things, was that over 3,000 of the skilled workers cleared out of the place and never went back there again, quite apart from the casualties caused and the actual destruction in the yards themselves.
The destruction reaches new levels with the help of technological innovation. Windows, small strips of metal dropped from planes, confuse German radar and reduce the accuracy of anti-aircraft fire. Improved radar navigation means incendiary bombs are now dropped with deadly accuracy. The results are shattering. A firestorm reaching 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit and stretching 1,000 feet in the air sweeps through Hamburg. Asphalt streets burst into flames, and people are incinerated where they stand.
When at last I reached my mother's dwelling place, I was struck rigid with shock and stood, rooted to the spot. There was no house left. The whole 4-story block of flats had collapsed and was a burning heap of rubble. There I stood, all alone in a smouldering wilderness. It was very eerie. Nobody was to be seen. Most people who had lived there must be dead and buried under the bricks. My mother always went into the cellar as soon as the sirens shrieked. I could see from where I was standing that there would have been no chance whatsoever for anybody to have come out from under the burning ashes. With all my fears realized and all hope dashed, I was certain that I had lost my beloved mother, that she must be lying dead under the ruins. Otherwise, she would surely have come to me if she was still alive and safe. The strangest part was that I did not feel anything at all. No tears came flooding to my eyes. I was too dazed and numb with looking at all the inconceivable horror around me. I just stood, staring and staring, I don't know how long. Although still alive, I seemed to have died inside.
During the bombing, more than 42,000 citizens of Hamburg are killed and 37,000 are made homeless. 1 million Germans flee the city, and Hamburg's labour force is reduced by 10%. Operation Gomorrah sends shockwaves through Nazi high command. Adolf Hitler refuses to visit the devastated city.
The real potential was not the bomb explosives, but the fire. And so they were able to burn down the city center of Hamburg. 40,000 civilians were killed. Bomber Command was able to demonstrate their power. So we can burn down a huge city, the second largest German city.
When they tell me how brave the population of London had been, how wonderful their spirit was, and I sometimes think, what about the German population who did much the same? Wasn't their spirit equally wonderful?
But the Allies can't afford to sympathise or admire German spirit. Their goal is to break the will of the civilian population and to turn it against the government.
Perception of the time by people like Albert Speer or Goebbels, they were worried. They were worried that if this kind of bombing continues, the morale of the German people might crack.
Morale isn't broken yet, but it's teetering on the edge. There's only so much punishment the people of Germany can take. During the remaining months of 1943, massed bombing raids continue. Meanwhile, to the east, the Nazis suffer their first major defeat at Stalingrad. German soldiers are now in full retreat as the Red Army stages a counterattack. The American 8th Air Force is growing in size and pressing attacks deeper and deeper into Germany. And they're preparing for something big. February the 20th, 1944. More than 1,000 American bombers descend on German air bases. With them is a new weapon, the P-51 Mustang fighter. The new long-range Mustangs take the fight to the Luftwaffe in the air and on the ground. Raids on Germany's aviation industry continue for 6 days, and the Luftwaffe suffers catastrophic losses. It becomes known as Big Week. The Allies now feel confident enough to take 1,000 bombers to the heart of Hitler's empire.
It was the British that made the Germans realize that war could be brought to German soil, too. Day after day, night after night. The offensive continues in greater and greater strength.
Berlin, Germany, February 1945. The largest ever raid on the German capital smashes the city to pieces. And this time, it has a tangible impact on German morale.
Chief of Staff of the German Air Force, General Jeschonek, committed suicide after the attacks began on Berlin. He knew that the war was going to be lost, and so did more and more of the German population. Morale didn't break, though it certainly cracked. Nazi Party members stopped wearing their swastika badges. The police stopped reporting for duty. There was disorder, looting in many of the cities. The Germans had to start arresting and executing people summarily for spreading rumours or for defeatism. So in fact, the German home front was beginning to break up.
During the Berlin raids, Allied leaders meet at the Yalta Conference in the Soviet Union. Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin agree on coordinated air attacks on eastern Germany. The plan is to clear a path for Russia's approaching Red Army. One of the identified targets is the city of Dresden.
This was an important communications centre. There were a lot of German troops passing through it. The Russians who were advancing wanted the Allies to bomb it. And also because Harris realized that Dresden hadn't yet been bombed. You know, cities like Berlin were already ruins. Here was a nice city, which no one had had to go at yet, and you could really show what you could do.
Dresden, Germany, February the 13th, 1945. Operation Thunderclap begins. By now, the Allies have almost total air superiority. Over 1,300 British and American bombers meet few air defences when they reach the city. First, the Lancasters and then the Flying Fortresses unleash hell.
The sound of the falling bombs were heard at first afar, then it came closer and closer, I thought, well, when will the next come and will it fall onto our house? I was told that if it is a real hit, then one doesn't hear it anymore. It was a fright which shook the knees and the teeth were shattering and one was somehow numb.
What Germany does when it starts the Second World War in Europe is it unleashes total war from the British Empire. When you blitz London, when you unleash total war, you must expect your enemies to come back at you with every bit of terror at their disposal.
These formations, flying forts of the 8th American Army Air Force, are on their way to Dresden. Their mission was a follow-up of the night attack just previously delivered by the RAF. The attacks on Dresden, in fact, were notable feats of cooperation, not only between the Anglo-American Air Forces, but also between them and their comrades of the Red Army, which was at this moment only 50 miles beyond Dresden to the east. The Americans approaching the city found fires still burning from the RAF's night attack. With 500-pounders and with incendiaries, in the face of considerable flak and in spite of cloud, they now added fuel to the flames and yet more destruction to the chaos already caused.
There were fires. Well, it was horrendous, quite honestly. My father was found after 1.5 years, only identified by his teeth.
More than 3,300 bombs fall on the centre of Dresden. Incendiary bombs create huge fires. Blockbuster bombs destroy entire streets, allowing the wind to feed the firestorm.
That wind, that firestorm. And there on the Elbe, the River Elbe, people burning. Phosphor burns on the water. So all these people trying to go into the water to save themselves from the flames. There was no escape. Then you saw all these bodies everywhere. You had to have your gas masks, but it's pointless having them because it was melting onto the faces of the people. Trying to go into a cellar, you saw people sitting there, but they're all dead. It's what happens. This dreadful fire drags the oxygen out and on the spot, they just asphyxiated.
The days to follow and weeks to follow, they were just putting the bodies on a Horsenwagen. And, you could see bodies and bodies hanging heads down and legs down over the cars. I don't think ever anybody will know how many people were really killed.
It's thought that 25,000 people lost their lives. Many of those killed were refugees fleeing the advancing Red Army. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, weeps uncontrollably when he receives the news. For some, it's a step too far.
To me, clearly an indiscriminate air attack. The goal of achieving was the city center and killing civilians. And if you intentionally try to kill civilians, everyone would agree it's a war crime.
In Britain, the first rumblings of discontent are heard. Questions are asked in Parliament, and Winston Churchill now tries to distance himself from the bombing strategy he once promoted.
It's been argued recently that the bombing of Dresden was a war crime. I think the problem is that if the bombing of Dresden was a war crime, then most of the bombing that the RAF had carried out since 1941-42 was a war crime because they were deliberately targeting civilians and civilian morale.
Bomber Harris is unapologetic. Dresden was, he says, a mass of munitions works, an intact government centre, and a key transportation point to the east. It is now none of those things. The airmen dropping the bombs believed they were simply doing their duty.
Their civilians were in the front line, just like our civilians. My conscience was clear. When you saw what was happening in Auschwitz and other concentration camps and what those people suffered, you knew you were fighting for freedom.
Berlin, Germany, May 1945. The guns fall silent on the streets of the capital as the Red Army surrounds and captures the city. Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich is over. The Allied bombing campaign has been crucial in clearing the way for the Soviet advance.
The air war was hugely effective because it forced the Germans to devote an enormous proportion of their total resources to air defense.
41% of the German resources were going into the air industry. By doing this, they enabled the Soviet army to defeat the Germans on the Eastern Front.
Hermann Goering had sworn that not one bomb would drop on Germany. Now, great swathes of the country lie in ruins. As many as 600,000 Germans are dead. 7.5 million are homeless. Despite all this, German morale is never completely broken. Soldiers fight to the very end, and there's no civilian uprising.
I thought the German people were very courageous. A lot of respect for the Germans. How they stuck it, I don't know.
This was a total war, and this is the only way you could win it. However terrible it was, both for the people who were its target, German civilians, and for the air crews that carried it out, who had hugely heavy casualties.
160,000 Allied airmen never return home. For those who do, it's sheer relief.
It's one thing to get there, it's another thing to get back. And to get there and back isn't everybody's good fortune.
6 years of brutal fighting has taken warfare to new, once inconceivable levels. For the first time, soldier and civilian alike find themselves on the front line.
As Harris himself said, and I think he was right in the end, if you want to destroy anything, you've got to destroy everything. In the end, it turned out that the sledgehammer was much more effective than the scalpel.
The total destruction of Germany is just one theatre of World War II. But the war stretches far beyond Europe. From tank battles in the deserts of Africa to naval campaigns in the Pacific and guerrilla warfare against the Japanese Empire in the jungles of Burma. This is total global war.